Today's conversation is going to be moderated by John Asante, goes by he, him. John is an award-winning, independent Ghanaian American audio producer, showrunner, and consultant. He's devoted to crafting stories that shine light on marginalized communities with the worlds of music, pop culture, and social justice. After spending much of his 15-year career producing radio shows and podcasts for companies like NPR, WNYC, Stitcher, and Pineapple Street Studios, John shifted gears to independent work in 2022. Since then, he's made podcasts in collaboration with several companies, including Spotify, A Kids Company, A Kids Co., Imagine Entertainment, Audible, Pushkin, and Heartbeat. He resides in Los Angeles with his wife and their two rambunctious cats. So I'm going to pass this over to John and look forward to the conversation.
Thanks so much, Corey. Really appreciate it. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, and thank you for your patience. I was driving across LA to get here to this co-working space that I'm working out of today. Anyways, I'm gonna introduce the rest of the panelists. Thanks again for being here. We're gonna start with Isis. Isis Madrid is a first-generation Colombian American journalist, writer, showrunner, and executive producer with nearly 2 decades of written decades of experience, in written, audio, and video storytelling. There we go. She has produced award-winning projects covering topics that span from public health to pop culture. As co-founder of Pizza Shark, a Latina-owned production company, Isis creates impactful, culturally relevant stories and develops top-class content for clients around the world. She is passionate about elevating underrepresented voices and championing diverse perspectives in media. And Isis lives in New York City with her husband and two pugs. Next, welcome, Isis. Next, we have Lushik Lotus-Lee. Lushik is an award-winning podcast producer and editor who started out as an intern at NPR. Same here. Since then, Lushik has produced shows for large networks like SiriusXM and Wondery, as well as public radio outlets. She also enjoys working with independent creators to conceptualize and launch shows, and Lushik is passionate about telling stories that have a lasting impact on listeners. Welcome, Lushik. And Dennis, to round out the conversation, we got Dennis Funk. Dennis is the founder and editorial director of Written in Air, a production studio and independent audio magazine. Written in Air has collaborated on audio projects with BBC Radio, Pushkin Industries, Pineapple Street Studios, iHeartMedia, and more. Dennis curated and dissected thousands of hours of audio art and documentary with Chicago's Third Coast International Audio Festival and produced features from around the world with the Washington Post. He's also edited audio series for Colorado Public Radio's Audio Innovation Studio. Dennis's audio work has appeared on podcasts, radio, theater, and in the halls of the Art Institute of Chicago. Welcome, Dennis. All right, let's jump in. Um, all right, so scope creep is what we're here to talk about today, and we know it happens in many ways. Um, and before we get into it, I just want to go over the poll real quick, if that's okay. Thanks to everybody who answered. We got 42 answers here. Great. Have you ever experienced scope creep? 64% said yes. Uh, 17% said no, and 19% said not sure. So, all right, seems like an overwhelming majority of us have dealt with this issue. So let's dive into talking about it and exploring it. Um, can someone on the panel give an example of when you were asked to take on additional tasks very quickly in a way that felt unfair? Who wants to start us off? I can call on someone too. Isis?
Okay, let's see. I have so many examples
Yeah.
actually. There is a trend right now. So I run a small production company, and there's a trend that if you're not a huge celebrity person with a lot of clout, that your show probably won't get a lot of dollars in the budget for marketing, for PR, for getting the coolest art, for getting the glitziest, rollout. And I had to learn this the hard way many years ago. Made the show, worked so hard, had a fantastic team working on it. And then we were like, here's the thing. What are you all gonna do? Because it was a big studio we were working with, and they did nothing, and they just kind of put the onus on us. And because, we were proud of it, I did what we could. But there were some asks where they were asking me to, direct photo shoots and do all of these things that were like just way beyond the production of the actual, journalism and audio, etc. That I had been contracted to do. So that was kind of a tough thing to navigate because I think in scope creep, a lot of times it's kind of like when you're on staff somewhere and you are doing the work of the job you're trying to get a promotion towards or something, but you don't quite have that title or that pay or those privileges yet, but you're trying to get there. So it was kind of like that. Like I cared a lot, so I did go above and beyond in this instance because I wanted the work of the people on my team to be out there. But that was an example that was kind of a tricky one. It was a little gray. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. It just like going outside of what you originally, signed up for, especially if it's outside of audio and like, oh, that's that's tough. Been there before for sure. Dennis, do you want to contribute to that before we move on to the next question? I would like to hear, given your perspective, in the ways in which you work too in your
Yeah,
company.
no, yeah, absolutely. I have a really kind of a funny one that happened to me one time, which was I was working on a project. It was like a narrative series, 10 episodes. And I was doing it sort of as a third party, right? So like I was working for like an IP company that owned the show, but I was making the show, and that went to another company. And my contract was for 10 episodes. And at the end, I got asked, hey, where's the final two episodes that we need? Because their contract was for 12. So there was actually a misprint in my own contract, but then I was being asked to make two more. So it became kind of a sticky situation of like, how do we navigate this? How do we figure out a whole new payment structure for these other things? Because obviously, like, it is work for me. I don't want to say no, but it's not in my contract. So I need to sort of go back and reconfigure that kind of very late in the process because I was getting ready to be, completely done with the project. We were in the last few weeks, and then I've got a client who's looking for two more because of a typo. So things like that happen sometimes too. Yeah.
Yikes. Just being episodes off is that's got to be really tricky. I've
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Lushik, would you like to contribute a little bit? I would love to hear from you, given your experience, especially working for like SiriusXM and Wondery, what you've dealt with.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started freelancing as an early career producer journalist. And uh, the first contract I got, I was like so excited. Yay, I landed my first freelance contract. This is going to be a great project. And their proposed project fee seemed reasonable. My scope of work was clear. The show had a narrative element and an interview element. I was doing the interview element, but they were being released together. And it was supposed to be like a 6 months timeline, and then it went on and on and on for many, many more months, and the project uh, agreed upon amount stayed the same. So that was a good lesson for me. I think it was a tough lesson for me to learn to also be very clear, like if this goes above the agreed upon time, that we would revisit the agreement because it did take much longer, almost double the amount of time we had agreed on. But I was also in Aziz's position where I was like, oh, this is such a good content and I really care for the team on the other side and I don't want to be the one to make a big fuss. Once again, early career. But next time when season 2 came about, I was in a much better position to negotiate other terms and be aware of that.
Wow. Oof. Yeah. It's it's so tough when those things go longer. And that like because when when you're on staff somewhere, it's just like you're still getting paid and it's just part of part of the workflow and you don't really, it might be more annoying, but it's you're still getting paid for it. So actually that leads me to my next question of like advocating for yourself. So like I want to put it out there like when you're hired by a client to create a podcast, whether it's audio or video, a reported story or some form of content whatsoever in media, could be even a web piece, something more even more written. What are the ways in which you advocate for yourself as an independent from the start? And Isis, I'd like to go back to you because you have your you have your own independent company. Like, what are you dealing with? Like, how do you advocate for yourself and your company?
Yeah, so we've learned this again through trial and error throughout the years. My co-founder, Carolina Muriel, she's great, and I just kind of sit down and we think about what's the product, who do we need to make this the best it can be, and then kind of think about how much time each person is going to spend on each single granular part. So like we account for like Caro and I receiving like a dump of materials from our client or something. Say it's a show we're coming on to produce, like we didn't pitch it or something. So like they're sending us like, oh, here's all our like documents and all our things, and you have to do like 17 intro meetings with all the stakeholders and all the different brand soup people that are on this thing. That's work. So like we account for like our time like scheduling those meetings, being in those meetings, replying to emails after those meetings, reviewing all of the work, all of the documents, um, like computing all of that and writing like our assessment on how to move forward after that. That's production management. And like I'm also, I come from freelance writing. I'm a journalist. So like that is also something that you do in your writing. So just any type of freelancer, just make sure that you are accounting for like every little bit that you are working, and you might not even consider it work. Like you're just like, this is just part of whatever. But no, that's your overhead as a freelancer. This is your time, and every moment of your time is valuable. And those are the specific examples of the type of work I do, but the type of work you do is probably different or could be different. Just think about it, and make sure you're not doing any free labor. And free labor is more than just like making the thing, you know?
Totally, totally. It's something I learned as well, like early on, that keeping track of your hours is super important. And that also, I think, also leads into like another question or thing I want to get into of like the exploratory call. Like, and you kind of already got into it, is like when you have that initial meeting with the client and you're figuring out say you're coming in at the intro part of a project, you're just talking about like what's the development side of it look like, where are they within the timeline of the project. Something that I've been taught to do is like figure out what is a development fee or like a kind of like initial fee. Because when you're full time, it's easy to think, and if you've been full time, it's easy to think, again, those are just hours that are part of your job. But like whether or not like you as a freelancer, as an independent, that project could happen or could not. So you still want to get paid for that time to ramp up all that project management work, everything setting up, the ideating. Um, Dennis, I'd like to hear from you, like when you have those initial exploratory kind of calls, what are what are you asking a client about with the scope of work? Are you also figuring out like, do I add a development fee in? Is that your development period in?
Yeah, I think absolutely. And it really depends on what the project's going to be, right? Because sometimes you're coming onto something that exists, or you're working with a client that has a brand voice, kind of knows exactly what they want. But other times when I come in, people are starting new, starting their very first audio project. So it's like you are essentially making a pilot for them from the start. So I build in that development fee kind of based off of that, of saying like, yeah, we're going to go through this in this very first episode of something that we make is going to probably have way more edits. We might make multiple versions of it, something like that. So knowing that those things are going to happen in the process, and then saying, okay, once we establish like, here's how this works and we lock it in, we kind of move on from there. Another thing that I do always ask up front, because I work with a lot of nonprofit clients, and they'll have money coming in from foundations and things like that, is getting a really like hard sense of their timeline, because a lot of times they have to spend their money by a certain point. So like we've got to build our project timeline pretty much based on that. Sometimes it's like, hey, you have 2 years to make a thing. Sometimes they're in a hurry and they have 6 months. So really knowing the inside of their financials and where their money's coming from is, I think, super important in those early calls too.
Oh my God, 100%. And I think we've maybe can attest to situations in which there's that fuzzy area of like, how are you getting paid? Like, I guess, yeah, exactly. Where's the money coming from? Um, really like the uncomfortable conversation of it. I think money is something we should definitely explore a bit, for sure. That could be its own webinar itself. Leszek, I want to throw this to you. when it comes to figuring out your rates and, what you think you should get paid versus what they might have budgeted, there's always that song and dance of like, my friend said, whoever reveals the number first is the loser. So, um, how have you gone about figuring out rates and like what your worth is, what your time is worth?
Yeah, also the hard way. So, I think at first when I would look at project rates, I thought, oh, these are like big numbers. I'm sure that'll be like very reasonable for the project amount. And yeah, they expect it to be part-time and make this many episodes, like the deliverables are clear. Um, but then it would take double the time in a week. So instead of extending past the projected timeline scope of the whole project, it would actually be taking more revisions. It would be taking, they want more detailed like pre-production. Um, and so that I started to factor those in, and I started to think about it as um an hourly rate. So I'd take the big number, I'd break it down. I'm like, okay, so when you break it down to like the weekly amount, you're like, oh, this is actually not a very high hourly rate. So then I'm going to try and negotiate a higher rate in the overall budget. And then you do your own calculations. And then you're like, okay, this is what I'm going to aim for. This is probably what they'll agree to and practice. So I would talk to other friends. I'd be like, okay, if this is the negotiation, how are we doing it? And they throw things at me, and I'd like try to learn how to do it. So, um, sort of practicing with other freelancers and other coworkers helped me get better, especially when they put you on the spot, because sometimes they will do that like on a call. They'd be like, what's the number an hour?
Yeah.
So yeah, I try to be like, well, I'll write down a proposal. Let's calculate the like, sort of trying not to be pushed into a corner and feel like you have to give a number on the spot, because like you said, that doesn't go very well when you start with a number.
Totally. I think like unfortunately, as you've kind of alluded to, is like it is a lot of trial by fire and sometimes learning from those mistakes. And it really does come back to like the agreement side of thing when it comes to the scope. And I think that's such a tricky song and dance. I tend to, this personally, me, I tend to let the client lead on like creating the contract. I know some folks feel more comfortable with that, depending on your structure, whether you have your own independent business and you have folks working with you, or you are just working solo. It's an interesting song and dance. So like, um, when it comes to defining, I guess I want to kind of get to like the kind of like conglomeration of agreement with scope. So, I says I'd like to hear from you, like when you are talking with a client, like one, do you propose a contract? And then like two, are you the one defining the scope from the start based on like the exploratory call?
I think it kind of depends, yeah, whether we're being hired to produce something, like be the production company on something, by like a studio or something, then they usually will come with they have like 17,000 lawyers, so they've got their standard whatever, and they send that to us, and then our attorney kind of, and they go back and forth. Um, or sometimes if because we also do a lot of just smaller development projects with indie producers or people that we come up with an idea with them, just me and Caro, and like it's just more of a partnership. And then we kind of come with the production agreement and then workshop it with them that way. So it kind of depends on the project, really. Yeah, as far as who makes it. Was there a second part to that question? Did I miss?
I think I kind of I'm even forgetting now. But no, I think you spoke to like the two things I was asking. I should not ask two questions. But it is like no, you're right. It really does depend on the kind of project. Like I've jumped into things from the very beginning. I've jumped into things as like more of a consultant type of, giving editorial feedback. I've been there as, the hands-on producer. So it really does depend on different things. So
Mhm.
um I know there's some
But I will say I'll never be afraid to like challenge whatever contract they're throwing at me, even
yes.
as like when I'm not working with Pizza Shark, because sometimes I do things just as Isis Madrid. I will not, and it's probably because I have time under my belt, like doing this like as Pizza Shark. But now I'm like really not afraid to say like, no, red line. I don't care who you are. Like
Yeah.
you can't do this to me. So
Right,
yeah,
right, right, right.
yeah.
That's good. That's good. I know that takes some time to do for
It's
sure.
scary,
It
especially when you like
is.
need the money because we're all just trying to survive, you know?
100%. And that gets to something I want to talk about later of like whether to stay or go. Before I get to that, I want to also get into like when it comes to kind of figuring out going back and forth with a client, how do you address and push back against scope creep in a way that lets a client know that you're still interested in working with them? Dennis, I want to throw that to you.
I mean, it's a really good question. And I think it's like you're really what you're. I think you have to think about it as like you're just setting your own boundaries in that space. Really, I think it's not hard to turn down work when it's like completely ridiculous, or when it's not completely ridiculous. What the ask is like. So I think it's really just, replying in a way that's like, hey, generally like this all looks great, but here's what I would like to see added into this contract or something. Or like, just expressing any kind of hesitation you have about that scope right up front is going to, and not being nervous about doing that is going to cause you so many fewer headaches, like later on, to be quite honest, that it's like you just kind of have to like push yourself to get over it and get through it, really. I don't know. I think it really depends on who you're working with and who your client is. Like sometimes you're working with other people who are producers or who are like kind of in the same level as you. I feel like very seldom am I in like conversations with like the highest up executive people who might really want to give me pushback. Um, so I just think it is a conversation, and I think that's expected. So you should expect the same thing when you go in of like there's going to be us from you too, on your side, and you're not making it difficult for them at all. Yeah. Basically, just
Totally.
be nice, be kind. Yeah.
Exactly. It's a tricky song and dance, like a game of level setting. I remember I won't mention the client, but I remember coming in, seeing the scope of work. I was the senior producer on the show I worked on last year. It was a weekly show. And so the schedule was pretty demanding. We never really figured out a way to bank episodes, even though I tried very hard. And I will not get into why that happened. But I also realized along the way, every little thing was getting added. Like I was being asked to pitch and book guests. I was being asked to, do more host management. Even though we had an EP who was already saying like, I'm going to be doing that. I had to be giving all these extra tabs. And what I ended up doing was I went to them like every time I kind of felt like it was starting to happen a couple of times and my actual hours were increasing, I would schedule a meeting with them and be like, hey, let's have like I don't want to say an extreme come to Jesus meeting. It did get to that, unfortunately, at one point, but like I would say, like, let's talk about this. Like, you and I are on the same level. Like, we are all in the audio space. I'm doing these three extra things. Can I get more compensation? What can happen here? Can we get more help? Um, and so my next question really speaks to this, and Lushik, I'll throw it to you. So if and when the scope of your project increases, like how do you ask for more compensation or resources, either from the client's internal sources or hiring another freelancer? Because I've had struggle with this, so I'd love to hear what your experience is with this and if you've had any success.
Yeah, so when I've worked with bigger companies, they have like they're hiring me for a specific part and it's very clear and they have a whole team. And so I can be like, oh, I believe this person who you pay full time is can take this on. I'm very busy with the task that we've agreed on. So that was helpful. But increasingly I'm working with like independent clients or people who don't come from media and just want to make a podcast. And so what I try to do is, sorry, John, could you, I also got distracted. Could you repeat the second part of the question?
Yeah, basically like you started to get to it. It's like how do you ask for more compensation and resources? Like
Yeah.
are you asking the client for like help with internal sources? Are you hiring another freelancer? So you spoke to the part about like saying like, hey, this full-time person could uh ask them to do it. And it depends on the
Yeah.
organization. You're right. If you're slotted into a certain part in an organization that like in their project that makes sense. But like
Yeah.
have you hit a point where it's like you want to bring it like I guess like you were like maybe they can't have someone help out so you're like I just need more money for this like I deserve more money because I'm taking on more roles.
Yeah. So what I try to do is to put it in the original contract that like every so often we will revisit it because we agreed that this is the average time. It could take more, it could take less. If it consistently takes more, then we already agreed to have a conversation. Or we agreed on a project fee if it stays with like 20 hours a week. If it goes above that, then it's compensated at this rate per hour. Um, and then I've also been I do negotiate with the hourly rate in mind, but I also keep in mind not to negotiate hourly, if that makes sense. So like I'm keeping the rates in mind so I know the expenses and I can keep track of them easily, but I'm telling them this is the amount of hours an episode is expected to take. This is the amount of hours this season is expected to take, because I realized that even though I can negotiate a high hourly rate, watching the clock is really not conducive to creativity. So I always try to put that flexibility where we have a couple of hours flexibility, but if it's consistently over per hour agreement, we are revisiting the scope.
Totally. And that's really smart to put that within the contract. I think that's something I'm learning more and more of, like things they need to put in, especially when it comes to additional revisions. I think Dennis, you might have mentioned that, or Isis, I think one of y'all had mentioned that. It is tricky. I had been in the position of similar to you, or like in some different ways where I'm trying to figure out, yeah, number one, even like going back to like starting from the beginning, well, how should you get paid? Is it hourly? Is it by episode? Is it by like time period? I know we're talking about like asking for more compensation, but I actually kind of want to touch on that. And this I know it depends on project to project, but I would love to know y'all's experiences with like figuring out what is the best pay structure given your scope of work. And again, I know this like changes. Isis, what has worked best for you, depending on the project? Something, maybe something ongoing versus like a one-time thing.
Um, for something ongoing, I think personally for me, I avoid hourly charges. I I know myself, I know kind of what type of work takes how long. And I well, again, we haven't really intricate, like internal, like little calculator spreadsheet. We love a spreadsheet. You should all love spreadsheets if you're doing this independent. And we kind of calculate everything hourly internal and add buffers, like Lushik was saying. And then we've got a nice, like either per episode or per season or whatever flat rate there, whatever, and that's what we put forward. And then we do put those same type of buffers that y'all have been talking about. Like, we make sure there's always a timeline as a clause in the contract, and that timeline has an end date. That's something our attorney like really drilled into us. And at that end date, you reassess and you can say, like, this is taking too long, or we need to figure out a different approach. And you need to have those guardrails. But yeah, for me, especially for an ongoing project, I prefer giving them the big or like medium numbers and not just be like nitpicking, because that's just, yeah, that doesn't work for me. I don't love that. Um, but sometimes that's what it is, and that's what it is. That's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I think I had to shift gears in thinking that too, as I've been independent, done freelance work. Because at first I was thinking, oh man, hourly is the way to go, totally. And then I was actually hating how many times it was like, we're going to pay you per episode. I'm like, well, I don't know how long it's going to take me to make something per episode, whether it's like, a documentary or an ongoing like weekly talk show, like interview show. It's really tough. But then when you think about what I started to think about is like the arc of creating a show is that, and obviously you're going to have some weeks maybe when you first start out a project, if you're on for the long term where you only have a few hours a week. Like let's say like you're projected to work 20 hours a week on a project. Maybe the first couple weeks it might be like 5 to 8 to 10 hours. It ramps up. And then we all know when it gets close to launch or like heavy in production, that may get over the 20.
Hmm.
But
Wait, one thing I wanted to mention that you're making me think of is that when we're doing a show like from pilot through the season, we do and I know this maybe isn't relevant to like writers or whatever, but maybe in some way it is. We do a contract specifically for the pilot. And in that pilot, we're figuring out how long it will take to make this thing, what each person from the EP to the AP is doing to make it work, and what feels comfortable for everyone. And then we can expand and replicate that for a contract for a season so that everyone has kind of like figured it out a little.
Love that. And as Theo Balcom, hello, said in the chat, that is really smart. I'm glad you brought that up as part of scope, because that I think can also just get like completely blown by. That a client can be like, oh, well, a pilot's just a pilot, it's just part of the process of making a show. And it is, but it is an expense. And again, that pilot could not could go off and launch a show and could not or could not. Like I remember, I'll give an example. I was in touch with a pretty big media company within a big media company, one that I really liked, and were they kind of courted me for a little while. Like it was like a recommendation I got, and it sounded like we were going to make this like really great interview show, like advice show for parents with this like pretty prominent like former athlete who's now like an on TV and everything like that. And I went in thinking the entire time this was going to be like I'm going to be making this weekly show. I'm going to be making this weekly ongoing show, this really big thing. And like their communication had been terrible. They finally got back to me months later, and I had kind of ignored them. And we're going down the line. They're like, you're the person we want. We'd interviewed other people. You'd come really recommended, only to find out that they wanted me to produce the pilot to then send it out to then shop it around. And I thought they were just I'm like in my mind they had the money to produce it themselves and put it out and get like ad clients. So then when it came to even before I even like figured out like, hey, let's get the contract down, I was like, whoa, this scope is way out of reach. They wanted me to like fly to New York and like shoot this and direct it and basically I hadn't even talked to the host yet. I had talked to like their manager and like kind of like ideate on the spot, create a pilot, and then come back and produce it. Maybe hire my own team or use their internal team. It was very much up in the air. Never got even like the amount of compensation that I should be like. I never got the number. So there were so many variables around it that felt very icky and very weird. And I think that whether you're a producer, an engineer, a writer, I think that's something to look out for is like that vagueness. Like if they want you to create a pilot, they should say from the beginning, you want to create a pilot. And I think that goes back to the exploratory call and like really figuring out the scope. Um, Needless to say, I walked away from this project. I did not take it on. I'm not trying to be precious. I know so many of us are out here trying to get as the work we can, the work we need to like pay our bills, to still create, to really feel empowered to do this work that we can in the ever-changing landscape of podcasting, especially as so many of us have been laid off. I would love to get into the should I stay or should I go portion of scope creep. So like basically, yeah, I want to know, just raise a hands between the three of y'all, like, have y'all ever walked away from a project? Okay. All right. And I want to know, how did you do it? But Lushik, I saw you wanting to chime in. I want to ask you, what are your thoughts on this? Like, how do you determine that? Like, have you thought about it at least?
Well, what you were talking about brought up something for me, especially for early career journalist producers, is that often when they do want to hire you, they will do something like, oh, and if this goes well, we'd want to do a season two, or if like this goes well, we're hoping to get funding to get bigger, maybe we'll get distribution. And often they want me to basically they use that to try and negotiate a lower rate, right? Because they're like, oh, like it gets this feeling, oh, maybe if I give them a good deal, I'll continue to work with them, and I had to learn like, no, negotiate every contract like it is the first and last contract you'll have, and really be firm on that. And then the other part of what Aziz was talking about in terms of like accounting for everything, something that I was afraid to account for when I was starting out was like what it would take to learn something to do the thing they're asking me. And I thought, oh, well, I'm doing this. I got to gain all the experience that I have. But then, there's always new software, there's always new technology, there's always new plugins. So we're always going to be learning. And I had to learn to that counts, okay? That has to count as part of the scoping. But in terms of walking away, I think it's really, really hard. I mean, I started out in 2020, so it's been a roller coaster since then. So I it's been very, very hard to walk away for something, but I think I keep getting better at the negotiation, and I'm hoping to get to the point where I'm like, okay, now I can say no to something very firmly, or I can at least negotiate very well so that they understand that I do have boundaries. And if that's not okay with them from the beginning, then I can be like, okay, clearly this is going to be out of scope moving forward.
Totally. There's only so many times you can bend over backwards, especially for your own well-being. Okay. So for those who have walked away from a project, how did you do it? Dennis, let us know.
I think I know a big project that I walked away from. I was in it, like I was working on it and under contract and left it. And I didn't kill my contract. I saw the timeline, but one of the things that was happening is we had a date set, we had a timeline set, we knew when the end of this project was supposed to be, and it was a short contract, right? It was maybe we're going to work. It was an audiobook, so it was like we'll do this for 4 months or something like that. Maybe about 8 or 9 weeks into that, it was very clear that it was not going to be done by the date that was set. And I'm a contractor. I have, other stuff in my year planned. They knew this. This was built around hey, I know in January I have to leave and go on and work on this other thing. So this does need to be done. So essentially what I did was with about a month left on my contract, I went back to them and was like, hey, clearly we all know that this isn't on schedule. You know that I can't stay. I was like, it's time to start figuring out an off ramp. And being good with them and giving them that opportunity and not just working till the end date and then being like, well, you got to figure it out, but being good to be like, hey, let's now start the process of you need to find someone else who's going to come in or bring this in-house to do that transition. And really what our last, a couple of weeks together are going to be is just getting other people up to speed, letting them figure out where the project is so that they can move in. And I think what that does is it leaves the door open to work with places again, because again, it wasn't a bad relationship, it was just a timing thing. So you've got to navigate that in a way that's helpful to both ends, and just look at the time, be responsible with it, and do that part and try to be as helpful as you can as you leave something. Yeah.
Totally. And speaking, I know, Catherine, you just put this in the chat. So responsible to not leave a client in the lurch, even when they mess up in the timeline. And that's what you spoke to, Dennis. I think that's super important. Anytime I've left a few projects myself, and I've tried to give as clear of an exit strategy as possible. Sometimes it even depends on what the communication's like, what the vibe is like, but I've usually been like, hey, this isn't working for X, Y, and Z reasons. Here's someone I recommend, because I have something else coming up, or this isn't the right fit for me. It's a tricky balance, but I want to advocate for that. I know that not everybody, not we don't all have the ability to walk away from something, just in terms of just living in money and capitalism. But I think also evaluating your self-worth and your well-being are something to take into consideration when you do it. We only have a few minutes left. So as we wrap up, I'd love to hear from y'all. What are some takeaways y'all would give to the folks watching on how to manage shifting responsibilities on a project? Acis, I'll go to you first.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Oh, yeah. What are some takeaways you would give on how to manage shifting responsibilities on a project?
Let's see. I think you have to make sure, whether it's a long reported piece that's going to take a few months or whatever, just make sure you've got a standing meeting or a general vibe of regular check-ins at least once a month or whatever makes sense for you, just so that there can always be temperature checks. And if something comes up that's wildly out of scope or some kind of conversation you have to have, that it's not a surprise, or that there's goodwill and a relationship foundation to have those conversations comfortably. the contracts, I think, are the main thing here. Just make sure that you are thinking ahead, that you are thinking ahead to things that you may not know in the moment. And so you're like, at this point, we will revisit, like Lushik was saying. Yeah, make sure you're always checking the scope. I've had, things where someone's asking me to do something and yeah, just like Dennis was saying, keep it kind. Just say like per our agreement, like this is a little beyond my scope. Like how do you think we can meet in the middle here? Or like, or we can take this out of the deliverables if you want to add this instead, like figure something out and just make sure you're thinking about yourself as working with this client, not for them, because no matter if you're just like just a producer, just a writer, whatever, and they're this big company, like you matter, you're just as big as them. Maybe your brand will grow one day and they'll be like, wow, we worked with them, and just make sure that you are valuing yourself to being their partner and not just like some contractor, okay? So just make sure you respect yourself. And I was thinking about the walking away thing. I've had to do it a few times. Not great, and it wasn't great for my wallet at the time, but I think that if we all like make sure that our scopes aren't being creeped, then we make sure that the people coming behind us like won't also get screwed over, Because if I'm accepting a contract that is like not worth what I'm doing, then that client will think that's okay and offer that to the next person and the next generation, and we will devalue ourselves as a group. So let's stand up for each other in that way.
Oh my God, I'm here silently cheering for you because that's something I had to learn so hard, and I think I've been trying to pass it on. Just as we see these crappy rates come up for some of these full-time and freelance jobs, it's just these folks trying to take advantage of us. And although we're working independently, and sometimes competing for those jobs, we do have to work together in that way. So thank you for those pieces of advice. That's huge. Lushik, what's final takeaways?
Yeah, I think companies are relying on independence more and more and more, and they're having smaller in-house teams or no in-house teams. And so I try to remember like they really need our services. They also really need our expertise, like, our experience doing this, our experience, what works, what doesn't. Sometimes with independent clients, they want to try something that sounds cool, and I'm like, yeah, but you can't do that for forever. we gotta agree on the scope of this and like how effective it'll be. And I also try to be clear that I don't do the business side. Like I'm not helping you figure out how to sell it or monetize it and all that stuff. That's your plan. You're hiring a producer to make the thing. So I try to focus on that, especially as these big companies with smaller teams, even their in-house teams are having scope creep. So I'm like, it's very, very important to remember that they need this and that it's a two-way relationship, and to just stick to the boundaries.
Thank you for that. I know we're just about to go into Q&A, but Dennis, any last words of advice?
Yeah, I think one thing that I have found, because I've fallen into this trap a couple of times, is try to suss out if someone is coming to you or if this is like an informal RFP and you're actually bidding on a project with other companies kind of at the same time. One, it helps you figure out how you can like navigate conversations with people. It helps you be a little bit more honest about like, hey, here's what you actually need. And I've done that and gone through those conversations, and I've actually had people, go with a lower bid and not come with me, and actually come back to me like a year later and be like, "Oh my God, we regret doing this because this just like grew and grew, and the things that you told us that we needed in this were right, and now they're my clients, right?" So, yeah, just kind of try to figure that out early on. If they're only talking to you, or if they're kind of talking to a lot of people all at once, it's very helpful. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right. Great advice. Thank you all so much for contributing to this conversation. We have plenty of questions lined up. This is great. I'm going to toss it over to Anne Marie to really lead the Q&A because I would like to answer a few myself. So Anne Marie, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm Anne-Marie Awad. I'm the editorial director here at the Institute for Independent Journalists. I am pumped for this because I'm an audio person, and this is, I don't know if you've noticed already, this is a pretty audio-centric panel, but this has been such a great discussion. The question on all of our minds, thank you, Theo Balcom. How do you add video to the scope that you're talking about when you're coming at it from first audio first work? I know for a fact that Isis, you definitely have experience in this area. So I want to start out with you. And then if anybody else would like to join in.
Yeah, sure. So long, long, long time ago, I went to grad school for documentary film. So, like, technically, I knew how to do this. And then I was working at The World. It was like a BBC PRX brand soup program back in the day. And I was the social person teaching everyone how to do that. We were going live on Periscope at the time and Snapchat and all the things, and it was cool. But that was all like creative, right? And then finally, when I came out of that world of staff and I was doing the business for, myself and then for Pizza Shark, I had to figure out how to do it as um, a business. And that's been pretty difficult. It's totally different than like, yes, I know how to set up a camera and a ring light, and obviously I know how to do the audio and whatever. And that's been challenging. We pivot to video every 5 to 7 years in media, and it's different every time, kind of. So I think I just come at it as like I'm not afraid to say that I don't know things. So I'm not afraid to reach out to another freelancer, another head of a production company, and say, like, how are you doing this? Like, what are you doing? And we just kind of like share amongst ourselves. I think that's been key in adding video. And also like learning from the video professionals. So like I recently was hired to turn a wildly successful TikTok series into a long form video podcast series. And at this point, I don't know what's a podcast and what's a YouTube video, but whatever. That's another question. And so I've been, really picking the brains of the video production company that we hired to make the show that I developed for video and making sure that I'm, yeah, asking them how it works. Like there are so many things that go into like post-production and video that I don't know about. I think just talk to people, as far as adding video to things. And also, there are so many studios all around the country, honestly, not just in the major cities, that have the video setups, like just a plug and play. Like if you just want to do a chat cast, like just go rent out a studio space and sit in those chairs and record your thing. And then you don't have to really worry about it. You just hire the studio. And some of them are pretty affordable, like hourly. But yeah, I don't know. Just get out there and talk to people and don't be afraid to say you don't know things.
I'm a big proponent of that. Do our other panelists have things to add as far as video goes? That's fine. Not yet.
I think I honestly think my tactic is basically being the same. It's like it still feels new to me. I do very little of it because most of the stuff that I do is like narrative documentary and series work. So I haven't had so much crossover there. I've had like dabbling, and my first instinct has been like, I need to talk to my friends who are doing this already, or like the people I know who have made this transition and see how they've kind of done it. And what they're doing and using. And again, I think the same thing is those studios have sort of popped up everywhere. It seems like there are places to film podcasts now. So it's like it has become really easy. It's just I think probably asking the scope of like what does your client want? Like, do they really want like a special custom set and trying to figure that out and like going through that basically. Yeah.
Yeah, I will also say figuring out their goal, right, with they do, like, are they trying to gain more audience, or are they video first only, are they audio and video, like figuring out all these things as part of scoping. And like as you said, definitely talking to the video people and seeing what they're doing for this and what they've been doing.
Yeah, always talk to people. There are also video people who are trying to get into podcasts. And so, I've actually met one recently and I was like, you help me, I can help you. And She's helped us out on the Freelance Journalism podcast.
That makes a lot of sense because there's so much opportunity in this space for them right now. We're all
Yeah, for sure.
just
We're all mixing. I want to ask, I think a really important part of this process too is the exploratory call, like we talked about at the beginning. I want to go back to that for a second and just ask, like, do y'all have like a checklist of questions? I think I have some stuff at the top of my mind, but what are your sort of must asks in these conversations?
I'm happy to answer that. I think one of my first questions is because it is narrative and it's client-based work, is like, what are the editorial layers here? Like, who will our final touch points be? Who has kind of like final say and final control over edits and things like that? And will I actually be in communication with that person? Because sometimes it's someone who you never talk to and they're just CC'd on emails, but they'll make notes on scripts and like, how is feedback working here? How is stuff kind of weighted? Just because it can lead to conundrums down the line and getting things kind of tricky as projects move forward. And like getting notes that you're like, can I throw this away, or do we actually have to do this like 2 days before it's meant to be published or something like that? So yeah, that's always a top line for me.
Lushik, Isis, must ask questions.
Just understanding where the money comes from, but in the sense of like who do we have to make happy while we're also making this thing for a specific audience that might not be the audience we're supposed to keep happy to keep the money flowing. And so like understanding what their goal is with that. And so kind of like what Dennis was saying is like, are these the people trying to keep happy? Are we loyal to our audience first? So just having that in mind from the very beginning, because then if I understand their business goals, I can better help them achieve them while I'm doing the production and not start to feel like we're at odds. I want to make something good for people and you want to make something good for the higher ups or something like that.
Yeah, I'd say similar stuff. Who are the stakeholders? Who has approval power? What's the workflow on the client's end? Like how many people are weighing in? Because sometimes someone might seem like they're just an executive, but they're an executive that really wants to get into the nitty-gritty of every little edit, and you need to know that from the beginning because you maybe can control that, maybe you can't, so you need to account for that. How much time do they have, like, for each phase? Like, can they dedicate time to, like, scoping and piloting and developing and doing it right? Or are they on a fast track where they, like, have to get this out for their investor meeting in January or something, you know? So, yeah, like, those little nuances. Yeah, the rate structure, project hourly retainer. What exactly are the deliverables? This feels obvious, but I feel like we need to say this on this call. Like like list them. Um, and um, something that we do at Pizza Shark is actually, Anne, you worked on this project, a project that we made with a great client was kind of with a mental health stress on the producers, anybody who was going through these hours of tape. It was kind of triggering and traumatic tape because it was people recounting triggering and traumatic experiences at times. So we would just kind of, luckily we had an awesome EP on the client's end that we got to talk about this with from the beginning, and we wanted to make sure Pizza Shark, we're all about radical inclusivity and doing things in a different way. So we wanted to account for that because that is emotional labor, mental health labor that isn't accounted for usually. So we wanted to make sure that we were putting aside a stipend for everyone on the project to elect to take or not, where they could go and seek like some mental health support or something for that. So yeah, thinking about whatever your project is, maybe you're giving your producer tickets to go see to take a comedy improv class or something if it's a comedy podcast, but thinking of like different things that you can plug in there depending on what the show is.
Yeah, I appreciated that a lot. I think too, I know there's a lot of folks in here who found out about this webinar from AIR. And I will always shout out AIR's model contracts because I think that's like where I learned project scoping from initially. Because part of what's in that template is what you will not do. And that's part of what I ask in these exploratory calls too, is like, if I am the producer in a project, do I have any marketing related responsibilities? Are you expecting that of me? Or, if I hire an engineer, I make it clear that that engineer is not also writing a script or generating content in any way. So the what nots are very powerful too. I think this is a really important question. It's a great question. How do you factor in this sort of educating the client aspect of this? And especially the contract negotiating phase. Like if they really don't know how long something takes, if they don't really know what the process is, I find myself in this situation a lot. How do you sort of build that in?
Yeah, I'll take this one because I work with a
Yeah.
lot of independent people outside of media. So they may be a lawyer or a doctor, like, so just don't come from our world at all. And so I make it clear, like, as I'm walking them through how this works, also how, like, the podcast lives after we make it, about what it takes to get it to listeners, to increase your listeners, what it takes to get, I'm just walking them through the whole industry from beginning to end, as well as the different production phases. And so I'm like, in this capacity, I'm like a consultant. And whenever that comes up during the project, I'm like, have to explain, okay, now they want to know why I can't isolate voices not taped in the studio. Like, if I have to go into all these details, you really want to know, that is also consulting. Okay, so when it becomes like the hand holding, the stuff like that, I just, from the beginning, I'm like, this is why you hired me. You hired me for the expertise, and the expertise, I'm giving you an hour worth of information that you're going to use for like so much gain in the future and as you become a podcaster. And so I try to make that clear in the beginning. Like, there's an element of like, I'm introducing you to the world of podcasting, getting you prepared to be a host and all these things, and telling you who you should follow and who you should listen to and what conferences you should go to. So there is that as well. I try to just be like, you hired me for my expertise, and that is not just producing. That's a little bit different.
Totally. I'll add that, especially when I'm working with a client outside of the podcast world or audio or even media world that wants to create a podcast. I've worked with a couple of nonprofits as well. I'm working with a kids book publishing company right now. I asked them first off, like, even from before, like figuring out how I'm going to contribute, it's like, number one, do you have a pitch deck? Number two, do you know what you want to do? And number three, if you don't, here is a sample like pitch document that I have that I actually got from a friend who used to be a podcast agent at a major talent agency here in LA that she would use to talk with clients who didn't know about podcasting and be like, hey, these are like the 10 elements you need to even like think about why you should do this podcast. And I think that's helped from the beginning. Even if they have a sliver of an idea, or even if they have a pitch deck, I'm just like, here are the things you need to think about, and then here are the things that I can contribute. Um, and then I also got challenged by another client that I ended up not working with because I found out at the end they didn't really realize how much went into a podcast. They wanted to know literally how many hours things would take. So I was actually getting better at scoping out how many hours everything would take and keeping track of that from previous projects. So what I did was I gave them a breakdown of like literally like, okay, each part of the production process, like like writing a script, directing a recording, post-production, different elements of post-production, we're going to take these many hours. Now, I had a friend say, pull back a little bit, don't give too many details, but I did it, broke it down enough that I was able to give like, this is how many hours it'll take to create a pilot. This is how many hours it'll take to create each episode based on what you want. Now we can mix and match and tweak based on how well you want this podcast to sound. And then going back to basically level setting on what they want it to be like. It's like, do you want it to sound like how I built this, or do you want it to sound like I don't know, like any other random like comedian's chat cast out there? I think it's a matter of level setting when it comes down to it, working with that client. With that said, I do have to bounce, which I let everybody know in the panel. I have to go record a podcast right now, direct recording. So, um, Sorry to bounce early, but thank you all so much for being here. All right.
Thank you, John. The show is going to continue.
Yes.
This is look, it's the immersion. He's going to make a podcast right now.
Yes.
We do have time for just a few more questions. I want to ask about rates. Somebody had a really good question about Isis. You touched on this, but I also want to put this to the other folks. The rate structure that you find to be most effective for getting paid fairly. So, do you have rate sheets for certain type of work, or if it's more of a passion or values-based project, do you kind of have like a lower threshold for what you'll accept, or I feel like I'm complicating this question. How do you make sure you're getting paid fairly from project to project? Isis, do you want to expand? Oh, no, go
So
ahead,
I was
Dennis.
trying to
No.
unmute myself. No, I mean, I work on bands for stuff. Like I know if I'm working for a for-profit client or a non-profit client or an independent client, like I have bands of what I will accept from people kind of understanding their budget and things like that in their ask. And it keeps me happy because I get to work with a lot of different types of people because, obviously some are willing to pay a lot more, but I don't think having a like hard and stone rate of I only accept something is good for your business, to be quite honest. So knowing sort of the parameters that you can work within is good, and the time too. Like if someone obviously wants you to do X hours at a lower rate and then more hours at a higher rate, like that's better too. But yeah, I keep a band. I always, if people want to argue with me on something, there's always the air rate cards to kind of default to be like, hey, I mean, air, if people don't know, is the Association of Independents in Radio, and that's like our industry standard setter. And then I also do, like in the UK, I do a lot of work with BBC, which have low rates typically, but all projects have like a set fee already. So I can always like reference those for the year or something and be like, well, this to do this is already, paying X amount. So it needs to fit somewhere around that. So there are places to kind of find, set rates and things like that. And always also ask other people what they've been paid for projects. Who, if you know people who've worked for people, or something similar, see what they've been paid. And, secretly, we are all happy to talk about money to one another to help one another out. So I think it's totally useful to use your networks for that too.
Absolutely. Share the information. Lushik, Isis, you want to answer this one? Or Isis, you want to elaborate?
We're talking about rates.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Similarly, we work with let's say there's like someone we know who has like a really wonderful idea and they come to us and we are partnering on that idea and they don't have any money. Maybe they have like $200, Maybe we'll just take the $200 and we'll come up with a contract that says that we're partners in some way. They own the IP. Oh, always ask about IP, y'all. Whether you're writing or doing audio or video, anything, make sure you are fighting for your IP. Anyway, so we'll partner with them, and there's different ways to make things work, right? So if it's like a smaller client, a nonprofit client, you figure it out. Maybe we do a lot of development work for Campside where they'll hire us and we'll like come on and like help them develop a project and pilot it. And maybe we're doing development work with someone else and they don't have as big of a budget as someone like a Campsite or whatever, but we can find a way where they are providing some of the labor. They're part of the production team too, so that lowers our costs because we've got them helping in a way. I don't know. There's always ways to meet in the middle. Something else that Gato and I do is like every year we'll kind of get together and think about our cost of living, like how much does it cost to be me this year, and we'll like have like a meeting where we'll be like, this is how much it costs to be me this year, and we'll kind of figure out like, here's our targets for like how much money we individually like to make out of like Pizza Shark projects in the next year. And then also we kind of divide our work, whether it's sorry, there's like beeping outside. Whether it's like video, which we do now too, podcast, whatever, we divide it reductively into big brain work and like technical work. And we charge more for big brain work. This sounds so stupid. So that's like developing and like these things like consulting and hand holding and like sharing our expertise with someone who's now going to take that expertise with them. That's big brain work, and you're doing that in writing as well. And then there's technical work, where it's like we have a lower rate for that type of work, and we kind of each project will figure out the percentage of big brain to technical work. That's so silly, but yeah, that works for us.
Oh, I love that. It's like my new favorite thing. Lushik, did you want to weigh in on this one?
Sorry, repeat the question again, Anne.
How do you make sure that you're getting paid fairly from project to project? What's the rate structure that's worked best for you in terms of making sure that you get paid fairly?
Now I'm starting to think about having packages that I offer to clients. Like, this is tier 1, this is tier 2, this is tier 3. Tier 3 is like, you want it to sound like NPR. Tier 1, you want it to sound real casual, 2 people chatting. I'm not taking out your weird breathing, like just basic, getting it out to air. So that's something I'm thinking about. And then something else I'm beginning to think about, especially for next year, is like retainer agreements and what that would look like. So thinking about people who are like, because a lot of what I do, if I'm working with an independent, like they have to do work too, right? Like they have to listen to the draft, they have to give feedback on it, right? And when they take longer on their end, that means there's less I can do on my end, which ends up being less hours than we had budgeted and agreed to. Or recently I had a client learn the script and take out all the big brain work and just do the little brain. Suddenly I had half the work. So trying to approach it that way is like, how about I tell you what the boundaries are and you can pick. And if you want additions, there's a menu of additions that you can maybe potentially choose from, which is only not possible when you're working with huge clients, but when working with independents, it's like part of walking them through it. Like, this is the scopes that you can have.
Yes, no, I'm glad you brought up retainer agreements. Just a tiny plug for the business course. That is something we discuss. Um, just a couple more questions. What advice would y'all have for someone transitioning from full-time employee to freelancer? So this is a person asking who is moving from a comms role at a nonprofit and wants to get a head start on setting boundaries to avoid this kind of situation. So maybe everybody in this webinar might not be working on a project basis. How could you take the anti-scope creep ethos with you to sort of like other kinds of assignments?
Something, for example, I've been thinking about. Sorry, Dennis, you want to go ahead? Well, something I've been thinking about is, for example, I had a friend who's like recently went from being always full-time employed to starting to freelance. And I remember she got a tape sync assignment, and she was like, okay, they want me to send the audio while I'm on location. That's a rush fee. And I'm like, what? We can do that? A rush fee? Because she goes from the full-time world. She's like, everything I get paid for. They're like, we want you to take photos. And she was like, well, I drove 2 hours here, so I'm going to take really good photos. And if I'm going to take photos, you're going to pay for the photos. Otherwise, you have to send someone 2 hours to come take the photos. And then the other thing she really did not accept was the net 40 timeline. So since they had a rush for her to send the audio, she had a rush for them to pay the invoice. And when they didn't do it, she called their accounting department and talked to an actual accountant who was like, yep, okay. He tried to negotiate. She was very polite and was like, you have to pay me now. And I
Wow.
couldn't believe that it worked. Yeah. So I really think when you come from the full-time world, you already have a good sense and like just trust your instinct that like, yes, this is all stuff you should be paid for, and you should let them know that everything they want has its cost.
I just want to add to that, like how important it is to have like an additional contact who deals with your payments directly, because sometimes you'll be dealing with a person and that is not their job is literally to pass your invoice on, and you don't want that. I've had people forget to like be like, thanks, got it, and then not forward it, and that gets very messy. So like establish financial contacts at the places that you're working for and the people who are actually responsible for processing your invoices is super important.
That's so important, especially like if you ever do any kind of project with a university, there are like 12 people between you and your paycheck. Um, this is our last question from somebody who direly needs our help, who is in a scope creep situation currently. And so I'd love to get people's take on this. This person says, I'm subcontracting on a project that does not have a timeline and keeps extending. The person I'm working for is sympathetic to my position, but won't ask the client to set a date. Lesson learned on setting a timeline, but before the signing the contract. But what should I do now?
I would look at your contract to see if you have any like out clauses. Like I learned that the hard way with something where I had a contract where I like did not have a way out myself. So I've like baked those, like I'm very like, oh, here are my terms for leaving too. You should look back at your contract and see if there's any kind of language that you can use to either leave or renegotiate or something like that. I think that's like the first thing to do, absolutely.
I would also maybe do what was sort of recommended before when you're passing on a client that's seeming to be a lot of trouble. Like maybe you know someone who maybe it's scope creep past what you've been paid for, but maybe the work isn't horrible. Maybe they're not a horrible client to work with. It's just kind of going to take like an extra month or something. Maybe you know someone that wants work for a month and they could come in. But I mean, definitely don't put them into that situation if the client is terrible. But yeah, maybe something like that. And yeah, maybe don't kill yourself over this project. Do a good job, but take care of your mental health.
Yeah, maybe you can renegotiate deliverables since their timeline extended, or be like, I'm negotiating with the client. I need to know my schedule and my time coming up. If you want me to keep prioritizing this, we need to get back to discussing the timeline. Those are just some things I would try.
Or pay. I think also at a certain point, if you're like well over the line, you can start talking about, negotiating a different rate to finish the project within a certain time frame. And yeah, you're not totally powerless in this situation, but it does kind of stink.
No, they clearly need you, so you have power. Just yeah, advocate for yourself, and if not, tell them you're gonna walk, and maybe you can help them find someone, maybe not.
Exactly. And with that, I've been your Vanna White for this portion of the panel. I'm gonna throw it back to Corey. And thank you everybody for answering all these great questions.
Hey, thank you. I just want to thank everybody for attending. Thank you for being here. Thank you to uh, John, Dennis, Isis, and everyone else that's participated. Lushik, thank you to Catherine and Anne for inviting me to be a host today. Just make sure you join. If you're interested in getting the recording for this, go to IIJ Substack. That's the IIJ.substack.com. Sign up for the newsletter. And also you can check out the IIJ.com/webinars for other webinars as well, and upcoming webinars. So thank you again, everybody, for this. Thank you for the questions. And I guess everybody enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having
you.
us.
Thank
See
you.
you, everyone.